Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Our lead story tonight is about a young boy, barely 8 years old, now at the center of a high-stakes political game. Will he be the next Dalai Lama? There is intense speculation, and this is a hotly contested issue. China wants to pick the next Dalai Lama, but Tibetans do not want to surrender their faith to Beijing. So who is this boy? Why is he being called a successor? And what is China's reaction to all of this? On Vantage tonight, we'll bring you a special report. Also, the war in Ukraine is intensifying. Another Ukrainian drone has crashed near Moscow as Russia plans to deploy nukes in Belarus. Kiev wants the United Nations Security Council to intervene. Meanwhile, India is calling out Canada's hypocrisy on Khalistani terror. Why is Apple CEO Tim Cook going viral in China? And a story about America's forever war. No, I'm not talking about the one in Afghanistan. This is about a statue that has sparked a new culture war between the US and Europe. First, the headlines. Germany comes to a halt. Millions face travel disruptions. Air, rail and bus services have been hit thanks to a mega transport strike. Workers are demanding wage hikes amid inflation. Fallout of the Credit Suisse crisis. The chairman of the Saudi National Bank resigns. His comments are said to have precipitated the crisis. Saudi National Bank lost 80% of its investment in Credit Suisse. Iraq passes controversial amendments to its election law. The move will favor larger parties and sideline independent candidates from winning polls in future. Major oil leak in UK's Poole Harbour. Around 200 barrels of reservoir fluid were released from the UK's largest onshore field. And guess who's back in China? None other than Jack Ma, the founder of tech giant Alibaba, made a rare appearance in China where he hasn't been seen for over a year. This story begins with a photograph. This photograph. It is giving China sleepless nights. It shows a boy about 8 years of age, wrapped in robes, greeting the Dalai Lama. And this boy is suddenly an international headliner. The world doesn't know very much about him, neither his name nor his whereabouts. But he is in the news. Is he the next Dalai Lama? There is intense speculation. The picture was taken earlier this month. The date has not been confirmed yet. One report says it was clicked on the 8th of March at a religious ceremony in Dharamshala. Dharamshala is the home of the Tibetan government in exile. A ceremony was held here earlier this month. Some 600 Tibetans were in attendance and the Dalai Lama presided over it. Here is how he introduced the boy, and I'm quoting. We have the reincarnation of Khalka Jetsun Dhampa Rinpoche of Mongolia with us today. What does that mean? He says the new Rinpoche of Mongolia. Rinpoche is the third senior-most Lama or spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. And this boy is the head of the faith in Mongolia. At least that's how the Dalai Lama introduced him. So far, there were only rumors about his existence. No one had seen his face, but this ceremony has changed that. And that is why it holds deep significance. For the first time, the boy has been presented to the world. And why is he so special? He is believed to be the 10th reincarnation of Jetsun Dhampa. Jetsun Dhampa is the original spiritual head of Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia. So this 8-year-old boy is being seen as his reincarnation. His identity is still being protected. But we do have some details, like the fact that this boy belongs to an influential family. His grandmother is a former member of parliament in Mongolia. His father is a professor of mathematics at the National University of Mongolia. His mother is the chief executive of Monpolymet. It's a giant business conglomerate in Mongolia. And it has interests in construction and mining. Now, this couple had twins, 2 boys, named Aguidai and Achiltai Altanar. I hope I've got the pronunciation right. Now, one of these 2 boys is the reincarnation of Jetsun Dhampa, the same boy who met the Dalai Lama in that picture. We don't know which one of the twins it is. We can also tell you that this boy holds dual citizenship. He is a citizen of both Mongolia and the US. He was born in America. But why is there so much secrecy around him? The reason is China. His elevation, his introduction to the world, however limited, has clear political implications. It's a challenge to China's authority, even if that authority has no moral or legal basis. China wants to have sole authority on choosing lamas. But that's not happening here. Also, Mongolia shares a border with China. In the past, Beijing has targeted Mongolians over this. It has tried to enforce its will. In 2016, the Dalai Lama made a series of visits to Mongolia. The Chinese threw a fit about it. They cancelled diplomatic meetings. They delayed loans. They shut down the border. Basically, they put so much pressure, both political and economic, that the Mongolians relented. They agreed to not host the Dalai Lama again. And so his last visit to Mongolia was in November 2016, but the Dalai Lama made the most of it. He made a big announcement then. He said Jetsun Dampa has reincarnated in Mongolia and that a search was on to find him. This was back in 2016. Almost 7 years later, that search seems to be over. The Dalai Lama has officially anointed a successor. There is no official comment from Mongolia yet. Perhaps they do not want to upset China anymore, or they don't want to draw attention to the boy. Whatever be the reason, the silence is well advised, because history shows what China is capable of. Let me tell you what happened in 1995. That's when the Dalai Lama named the new Panchen Lama. What's the Panchen Lama? The second most important figure in the Buddhist faith. His name and identity were declared in 1995. Do you know what China did? They arrested the child and then replaced him with their own candidate. Most Tibetans reject the Chinese choice, but they don't know where the original Panchen Lama is. So this time they're playing safe, telling followers that a successor has been chosen, but not giving away too much about him. What is China's reaction to all of this? Nothing so far, but it won't be wrong to say that Beijing is tracking this closely. It has been wary of any move by the Dalai Lama. He's the world's most famous political exile. A big thorn in Beijing's side. China wants to control Buddhism, but as long as the Dalai Lama lives, he is the undisputed leader of the faith. So China wants to wait it out and control the succession plan. But the Dalai Lama has other plans. He's identifying the next leaders and shaping the future of his faith. The boy from Mongolia may or may not be his successor, but he'll pave the way for the nomination of a successor, which brings us to the next question. Will the Dalai Lama name a successor? He says he'll decide when he turns 90. Right now, he's 87 years old. When he turns 90, he plans to decide whether he should be reincarnated, and that he would want to be reincarnated in a free country. That's what he said in the past. A free country, which could mean India. Why India? Because it's been the modern capital of Tibetan faith since 1959. That's when the Dalai Lama fled from China. With him came thousands of his followers. New Delhi gave them a home. In the beginning, the Dalai Lama had hoped that the exile would be temporary. But China's actions made it impossible to return. It tightened its grip on Tibet and Tibetans. Now it has every intention of naming the next Dalai Lama, and this has become a tense waiting game. India can play a decisive role here to ensure that Tibetans get to choose their next leader. It won't be easy, but it would be the right thing to do. Meanwhile, the global banking crisis looks like it's here to stay. Another big name is making news. We're talking about Deutsche Bank. Its shares fell sharply last week. They dropped by more than 14% on Friday. There was panic, so much so that German Chancellor Olaf Scholz had to try to calm nerves.
Deutsche Bank has thoroughly reorganized and modernized its business model and is a very profitable bank. There is no reason for concern whatsoever.
No reason to be concerned. That is the message from Germany. But if that's the case, why are investors dumping shares? Is Deutsche Bank the next Credit Suisse? We'll try to answer that tonight. First things first, it's much healthier, this bank. Fundamentally, there is no problem with the bank. Deutsche Bank is well capitalized, meaning it has enough cash to sustain itself. So why is the share price falling? The fall in the value of the bank's stock is mainly due to investor panic. You can blame it on baggage of the past. The bank has seen major financial challenges before. In fact, before the 2008 crisis, this bank tried to compete with the giants from Wall Street. It also led to a flurry of scandals. There were misconduct and compliance cases and losses worth billions of euros. A few years back, the International Monetary Fund called Deutsche Bank the riskiest bank in the world. But since then, a lot has changed. The bank launched a major restructuring plan. It cut thousands of jobs. It focused its business on Europe and managed to restore its financial health. In 2022, Deutsche Bank booked its highest annual profit since 2007. So why is the share price falling? Mostly thanks to the ghosts of the past, also because of the general sentiment. You see, this month, 2 American banks failed. The world saw turbulence. Investors began reviewing their portfolios. They were on the lookout for the next weak link, the next bank that could face a crisis. And Deutsche Bank took the brunt of it.
So a virus of insecurity is planted relatively quickly and then lasts for a very long time. The uncertainties about the banking system and the loan defaults, the risks in the banks can be felt everywhere in the market. But that doesn't really change the fact that they are special cases that have ultimately caused the entire banking system to be thrown into disrepute and uncertainty.
Uncertainty. That's what it is. And it's not going away in a hurry. Today, the Silicon Valley Bank was acquired. It has been bought by First Citizens. That's a bank from North Carolina in the US. Remember, Silicon Valley is where the crisis began. It was the first bank to fall. It is the go-to bank for the tech sector in the US. It collapsed on the 10th of March. There was a bank run. Almost 3 weeks later, the bank has been bought out. It was inevitable. The bank was seized by regulators. An acquisition is expected to restore its health. And what's the deal here? What's in it for First Citizens, the bank that is buying it? It will get a large chunk of SVB's assets. They're worth $72 billion. First Citizens is buying them at a discount of $16.5 billion. But the big picture still remains negative. American citizens do not trust banks. This is according to the findings of a new poll. It was conducted by the Associated Press. The poll says only 10% of adults in the US have quote-unquote high confidence in American banks, and 31% hardly have any confidence. The conclusion is this: America needs to do more to regulate its banks.
Even though most Americans have at least some confidence in banks, the poll shows a majority say they want to see the US government do more to regulate banks and other financial institutions. And that concern about under-regulation is bipartisan. It's a majority of Democrats and half of Republicans who say they want to see the government do more to regulate banks and other institutions.
What's happening with American banks is worrying. Even the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has called for more vigilance. The managing director of the IMF has appointed assessment. She says the global economy faces risks. Rising interest rates put pressure on debts. And this has led to stresses on leading economies.
As we have seen in recent developments in the banking sector in some advanced economies. But we also have seen policymakers acting decisively in response to financial stability risks, and we have seen advanced economy central banks enhancing the provision of US dollar liquidity. These actions have eased market stress to some extent, but uncertainty is high, and that underscores the need for vigilance.
These comments are stark. The IMF MD has joined other economic leaders in sounding an alarm. Last week, the European Central Bank said the same thing. It said the turmoil in the banking sector will hurt business and growth. Where does all of this leave India? Not in the zone of immediate risk, but at a point where you have to up your guard. India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has said that she is reviewing the performance of public sector banks. She has issued specific instructions. She wants banks to undertake, quote-unquote, regular stress tests. Given the global environment, it's best to be cautious than sorry. Now to the war in Ukraine. Nukes are in the picture again. A Ukrainian drone has been shot down south of Moscow, that's deep inside Russian territory, and Kiev wants the United Nations to intervene. Not sure how it will help, but let's bring you up to speed with the developments one by one, starting with Russia's big announcement. It is planning to station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Russian President Vladimir Putin made this announcement on Saturday, and it's got Ukraine scrambling. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry has asked for an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council. It is asking the world to counter what it calls Russia's nuclear blackmail. I've got the statement from Ukraine with me. This is what it says. Ukraine expects effective measures to counter the Kremlin's nuclear blackmail by the United Kingdom, China, the USA and France in particular as permanent members of the UN Security Council. We demand to immediately convene an extraordinary meeting of the United Nations Security Council for this purpose. If the meeting is called, what will it yield? Nothing more than dramatic sound bites. Remember, Russia too is a permanent member of the Security Council. It has a veto power. So does China. So there won't be a resolution. At best, Ukraine can hope for a public rebuke of Russia. And Putin has already offered a justification. Here's why he says he's placing nukes in Belarus.
Belarusian President Alexander Grigorievich Lukashenko has long raised the question of deploying Russian tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. There is nothing unusual here either. First, the United States has been doing this for decades. They have long placed their tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of the allied countries, NATO countries in Europe. We agreed that we would do the same without violating our obligations. I'd like to emphasize this, without violating our international obligations on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. We do not transfer nuclear weapons, and the United States does not transfer nuclear weapons to its allies. We are doing what they have been doing for decades, stationing them in certain allied countries, preparing the launch platforms and training their crews. We are going to do the same thing. This is exactly what Alexander Grigorievich Lukashenko asked for.
Putin may have a valid point. For years, Russia has proudly stated that it does not go around placing nuclear weapons in allied nations. That's not something that the US can boast of. And now the change in Russia's policy may be hypocritical, but it has a precedent set by the US. How can Washington condemn something that it itself is guilty of? Well, it can, because it's Washington, and it has. NATO has called the plan, quote-unquote, dangerous and irresponsible. EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell has threatened new sanctions on Russia and Belarus. And America's national security spokesperson John Kirby has said this.
I can tell you that we've seen nothing that would indicate Mr. Putin is preparing to use tactical nuclear weapons in any way whatsoever in Ukraine. And I can also tell you that we haven't seen anything that would cause us to change our own strategic nuclear deterrent posture.
Perhaps the US knows it can't do much about Russia's plan without curbing its own activities. And perhaps Ukraine knows that Security Council intervention will be a non-starter. So it is directly appealing to the people of Belarus. Here's a statement from Ukraine's Foreign Ministry, and I quote, Ukraine appeals to Belarusian society to prevent the fulfillment of the criminal purposes regarding the deployment of nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus, which will further turn this country into a hostage of the Kremlin. Quick fact. Belarus borders both Ukraine and Russia. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko is a close ally of Vladimir Putin. He is unlikely to allow Belarusian society to get in the way of Russia's nuclear plan. And what exactly is that plan? Putin wants to station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. What are those? There are two classifications of nuclear weapons, tactical and strategic. Tactical nukes are smaller. They're considered less dangerous than the larger, deadlier strategic nuclear weapons. And they can be used on the battlefield without obliterating everything. In contrast, strategic nukes are the ones used to level entire cities. You know, like the ones that the US dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during the Second World War. Those were strategic nuclear weapons. Tactical nukes are smaller. They can be used in a more limited capacity. So their impact is small. But that doesn't change the fact that they're still nuclear weapons. They're devastating. And placing them in Belarus would be an escalation by Russia. It would be a warning to Ukraine and its Western allies, telling them not to push Russia any further. This escalation comes amid news of another raging battle in the war in Ukraine, the battle for Avdiivka. It's a small city near Donetsk in eastern Ukraine. Last week, Ukraine said it could become a second Bakhmut. Because like with Bakhmut, Russia has been trying to capture Avdiivka by bombing it into submission. Over the weekend, it was on the receiving end of intense shelling. Officials say it's becoming more and more like a place from post-apocalyptic movies, which begs the question, what's the reason behind this sort of devastation? Could Russian bombardment be a retaliation for something? On Sunday, videos like this emerged from a town 220 kilometers south of Moscow. This is deep into Russian territory, some 300 kilometers from Ukraine. This is where a drone crashed. Russia says it was a Ukrainian drone. It lost control and crashed into the town. 3 people were reportedly injured. Remember, Ukraine has always denied allegations that its drones have flown into Russian territory. It has never claimed official responsibility for attacks within Russian borders. But these attacks have been happening off and on, like last week's attack on a Russian base in Crimea. Could Russia be frustrated with these guerrilla-style attacks? Is it reacting by flattening Avdiivka and placing nukes in Belarus? Whatever the reason, the war shows no signs of slowing down, and the world will continue to suffer till a solution is found. China had a high-profile visitor this weekend. Apple CEO Tim Cook was visiting, and now he's gone viral. It's a tricky place to be, going viral in China. The last time something went viral in China, the whole world had to shut down. This time, it's not so bad, not yet. Tim Cook has gone viral for a speech, one where he said Apple and China had a symbiotic relationship. He said Apple's growth was tied to China's growth. Now, that's quite a statement, given the US-China trade war and the larger sentiment really around business in China. But the Apple top boss said it, and the Chinese media was quick to pounce on it. The timing was even more interesting because of the case of TikTok. Just a few days back, the TikTok CEO was grilled in the US. Western governments are banning TikTok amid security concerns. The US has given it an ultimatum: face a ban in America or leave the Chinese parent company ByteDance. Basically, TikTok, a Chinese company, has its back to the wall in the US, while Apple, an American company, is being celebrated in China. That is the difference that the Chinese media is trying to highlight. Leading from the front was Beijing's mouthpiece, the Global Times. It quoted someone as saying that China is the one that is actually practicing fair and free trade. But it's not as simple as that. Let's look at the facts to understand the full story. Tim Cook was in Beijing to attend the China Development Forum. It's a government-organized event. And what was he going to do except perhaps praise China? Remember, China is a big market for Apple and Apple products as well. Apple earned almost $24 billion in revenue from China in just the last quarter of 2022. So perhaps Tim Cook's words should be taken with more than a pinch of salt, because the ground reality seems a bit different than his speech suggests. You see, Apple is diversifying its manufacturing base. It is looking at countries like India and Vietnam as alternative manufacturing hubs. Apple product manufacturers have agreed to set up multiple factories in India. Taiwanese Apple suppliers like Foxconn, Pegatron and Wistron are all expanding their footprint in India. This is in accordance with Apple's risk reduction plan. And why is Apple diversifying? One reason is its experiences with COVID in China. Remember, Beijing adopted a strict zero-COVID policy to combat the virus. It was forced to repeal the policy last December after mass protests. But zero COVID greatly damaged the business sentiment while in force. China had imposed draconian measures to try and stop the virus from spreading. It disrupted supply chains across industries. Apple felt the pinch too. You may remember the chaotic scenes at the iPhone plant in Zhengzhou last November. It's the world's largest iPhone manufacturing facility run by Foxconn. Workers there protested, and they were protesting against the brutal lockdown conditions. Some even tried to flee the factory by jumping over fences. The events shook global belief in China. Then, of course, there's the rising US-China tensions. They're fighting over a lot of points, really. TikTok, computer chips, tariffs, and of course, Taiwan. The Taiwan issue may eventually spiral into a full-blown US-China war. So both the zero-COVID policy debacle and the rising US-China tensions seem to have woken up Apple. It's trying to relocate some of the manufacturing, but it can't be done overnight. Even last year, more than 90% of Apple products were made in China. The years of investment in China cannot be undone in an instant. Apple will still have to depend on Chinese manufacturing for some time. So you can expect Tim Cook to keep going to Beijing, keep spouting praise at a Chinese government event. After all, Apple is a business, and China is both a manufacturing base and an important market. So Tim Cook is going to do whatever he has to do to keep his business running smoothly. But as far as China's narrative is concerned, keeping an eye on the ground reality might be a better idea than listening to Cook's speeches in Beijing. Is Twitter sinking? It surely is going through a rough patch, and Elon Musk is the center of all the action. He has a reputation of being a radical businessman. You could call him a disruptor. He likes to take risks, make a lot of changes, and even more noise. And he has brought several changes to Twitter. But how has it impacted the platform? Twitter has lost most of its advertisers. Users are frustrated because Musk wants them to pay. And the platform has lost more than 50% in valuation. Remember, Elon Musk bought Twitter for $44 billion. He now says the company is worth just about $20 billion. How did this happen? And what is he doing to arrest this slump? Here's a report.
Elon Musk took over Twitter in October last year. He walked into the company's headquarters with a sink in his hand. The Tesla tycoon declared that the bird had been freed. Perhaps the sink was a sign of the days to come, because Twitter is now sinking. According to a leaked memo, Twitter's valuation has halved in just 5 months of Elon Musk's takeover. The microblogging platform was worth $44 billion when Musk took over, because that's what he paid to become the company's boss. However, he did say that he was overpaying for the social media platform. In fact, Elon Musk even walked back on the deal, claiming Twitter had misled him. But he eventually paid $44 billion, and now Twitter is worth $20 billion. Elon Musk has called Twitter under him an inverse startup. He claims he had to bring in a whirlwind of changes to save the company from bankruptcy. Be that as it may, Twitter is losing its value at a breathtaking pace, despite Musk's supposed changes. And what are the changes Elon Musk has brought in? Quite a few, actually. They're having a cumulative effect on Twitter's valuation. Twitter is driven by advertising revenue. In 2021, Twitter earned $5.1 billion in revenue. 90% of it came from ads. But Elon Musk's takeover made Twitter's biggest advertisers run away. By January this year, 75% of them had stopped running ads on the platform. Ad revenue fell from $127 million to just about $48 million. And these advertisers are not obscure entities whose loss Twitter can take on the chin. They include the likes of Coca-Cola, General Motors, Jeep, Wells Fargo, and Unilever. Why did they dump Twitter? Because of Musk. They thought he would drastically alter Twitter's content moderation policies, and that their ads would appear near controversial and sensitive content. Musk has also upset users. He's asking them to pay for Twitter Blue. It's the platform's subscription offering, which can get any verifiable handle the blue checkmark. Twitter Blue's initial launch late last year led to many fake handles getting verified, and that only made advertisers lose confidence. Musk is also restoring some suspended handles, like Donald Trump, Andrew Tate, Kanye West, and Jordan Peterson. Controversial names cancelled for controversial reasons. Musk is bringing them back in the name of freedom of speech. He says his ultimate goal is to make Twitter a $250 billion company, and that there's a clear yet difficult path to achieving that goal. What he's achieved in the first 6 months is quite the opposite. Twitter has lost half its value. So the $250 billion mark looks far-fetched. A lot depends on Musk's ability to woo advertisers back and make Twitter Blue sail. Perhaps Twitter wasn't worth $44 billion after all, which means Elon Musk grossly overpaid for it, and it doesn't reflect well on the business genius he claims to be. Or perhaps Twitter did lose half its value, which also doesn't reflect well on the visionary disruptor he believes himself to be. Either way, the sync prank did not land well.
And here's the latest from Israel. The country is boiling. Tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets, waving Israeli flags, blocking roads and setting fires. It has made President Isaac Herzog speak up. He has urged the government to halt its judicial overhaul. And I'm quoting from what the President of Israel said. For the sake of the unity of the people of Israel, for the sake of responsibility, I call on you to stop the legislative process immediately. This is a win for the people of Israel, albeit a small one, because his function is largely ceremonial, the president's function, but his words show the alarming divisions in Israel at the moment. He said this after the civil unrest broke out last night, intensifying one of the gravest crises in Israeli history. And this fire was fueled by one sentence, a sentence that came from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He fired Israel's defense minister in a one-line statement. And here's why.
Now I declare loudly and publicly, for the sake of Israel's security, for the sake of our sons and daughters, the legislative process should be stopped.
This was the Israeli defense minister. He criticized the government's divisive judicial reform. He said it is causing turmoil in the country's military and posing a threat to the country's security. So he urged the government to halt it. He suggested that they sit down and talk with the opposition. But you already know how this ends. He said all this in a speech on Saturday night. By Sunday, he was ousted. Prime Minister Netanyahu did not even give a full explanation. Later on social media, he said, and I'm quoting, "We must all stand up strongly against refusals." Instead, there were others who began standing up to Netanyahu. Chaos unleashed. Demonstrations began late at night in and around Tel Aviv.
But this is not democracy. This is a new form of regime, what they call a procedural democracy or a hollow democracy.
The atmosphere is incredible, historic. I don't remember ever witnessing so many emotions. So many people keep coming, week after week, to protest at night, in the rain, and it feels we have reached an incredible climax, and we hope we will succeed.
נראה לי שהבנו כולנו ממש היום שהדיקטטורה החלה, ואני ישבתי על הספה בבית כבר עם פיג'מה והרגשתי שאני חייבת לבוא, כי הפיטורים של גלנט הם ממש היו צעד מאוד מאוד חריף, שאני חושבת שלא חשבנו שכבר נגיע אליו בשלב הזה, וזה ממש מפחיד.
And now Israel has been brought to a standstill. It is facing a historic general strike. Highways have been blocked. Crowds broke through police barriers outside the Prime Minister's residence.
We went to the Prime Minister's residence, and afterwards we got dispersed by the water spray. I got sprayed into my face directly, and then we just went here, like all of us. It was never as big as it was today.
Over 24 mayors have gone on a hunger strike. Flights were halted. Many malls, restaurants and universities are closed. Israel's Consul General in New York has resigned, and the country's largest workers' union has joined the strikes.
The defense minister, Yoav Gallant, is fired, dismissed like this. What are we, a banana republic?
But this is not surprising. The crisis that began weeks ago is only deepening, set off by the government's attempt to give itself greater control over the selection of Supreme Court judges, limiting the court's authority over parliament. Some are in favor of this. They say it will make the court more representative. It will show the diversity of Israeli society, but critics say it will give the government too much power over judiciary. It will remove the few checks and balances that exist. And for weeks, this has invited massive protests, tensions with the Biden government in the US, and unrest in the military. Now there's a rift in the governing coalition, because this decision only goes to show that Netanyahu remains defiant, and his recent move is a clear signal. It shows that he intends to proceed with a final vote in the parliament this week. But if Netanyahu thought that this decision will help him, he may have been wrong. It seems like his decision has backfired, for Israel has not seen protests that match the intensity of this one. The protests were so fierce, lawmakers started coming forward with doubts. Opposition also jumped on the chance.
I call on Israel's government, the Likud, to come to their senses, to stop the legislation and come talk to us. We don't have to crash. We don't have to fall apart. There are solutions.
Lapid called the sacking of the defense minister a new low for Israel, echoing the emotions of many. There is no precedent in Israel's history for a security minister to get fired because he warned of a security danger, something required by his position. So why would Prime Minister Netanyahu choose to force such a drastic move? Critics say he could not have expected such massive backlash. Others say he's getting angsty over his ongoing corruption trial. So he wants to push through the changes. And this comes at a time of growing Palestinian insurgency in West Bank. Tensions with Hezbollah, threat of Lebanese militia, and growing tensions over control of the Gaza Strip. But Netanyahu seems undeterred. He has given no indication that he's going to back down, and this could go either way. But one thing is clear, no matter the decision, it would be the most significant of shake-ups in Israel's political history. Our last story today is about America's truest forever war, their constant battle with culture. And their old foe is back in the picture. We're talking about the Renaissance. It is a period in European history. It began during the 14th century, marking the transition from Middle Ages to modernity. And what an era it was. It saw the growth of intellectual reason. Art and culture flourished during the time, but apparently so did a lot of pornography. At least that's what some aggrieved parents in Florida believe. A classical school in Florida has been making headlines. Their 6th graders attend a Renaissance art class. These are children aged around 12. And they were shown a picture of Michelangelo's iconic sculpture, David. Sounds pretty normal. After all, the statue has inspired generations. It is hailed as a masterpiece, a symbol of the Renaissance, and even strength and independence. It is on display in a museum in Florence, in Italy. It helps draw 1.7 million visitors every year. But Michelangelo is apparently too woke for Florida. We know that the purpose of art is to inspire reaction, but in this case, it was exacerbating. The art world has a word for this: drama. One parent called the statue pornographic. Outrage ensued. The school principal was forced out. This may seem completely bonkers to many of you, but this is not new to the charter school. Such reaction is expected. So every year it sends a letter to parents warning them that their children will see a picture of the naked sculpture. The politically correct word for this is trigger warning. Ironic, because this is a controversial term among the right. But this year, the school did not send it. The parents were angry, especially 3 of them. The school board decided to sack the principal. It said parental rights are supreme. And this drama is mildly amusing, but only if we don't look at the bigger picture, because this behavior is not restricted to one dysfunctional school. Florida has been seeing a shift, all thanks to its governor, some say, Ron DeSantis. He is on a censorship crusade, and schooling reform is part of his modus operandi. Florida has passed a number of laws. They limit how sexuality, gender, and race are taught in schools. Now a new draft law is underway. It will ban schools from teaching about menstruation before the 6th grade. So you can guess why such action has been amped up. The 2024 election is looming, and it is the battleground of culture wars, especially those in education. Europe is watching in horror and mocking the US. Italian daily publications are featuring satirical cartoons about David. The Florence Museum has invited parents and pupils from the Florida school. This is to help them learn what the statue really stands for. The mayor of Florence has tweeted about it, saying that confusing art with pornography is ridiculous. Well, it is. But we can't help but notice a similarity, too, between the ruling Americans and a former British queen. Queen Victoria was so shocked by David's nudity that she commissioned a fig leaf to cover him. And that's the thing about art. It binds us in mysterious ways across time. And if Michelangelo were here, we know what he would have said. I'll wrap with a quote of his. Why do you send fools to judge my work? And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Starting with Ukraine, Russia has been trying to capture the city of Bakhmut, but it's not been able to do so. Ukraine has released new footage. It shows how the city has been reduced to rubble after intense fighting. Meanwhile, in Paris, the Louvre is a famous tourist attraction. You know that already. It is a historical landmark too, but tourists cannot enter because of the ongoing protests against pension reforms. Also in France, people are protesting in another city. They want to stop the construction of a giant water storage facility. Countries all over the world celebrated Earth Hour over the weekend. We'll show you some of those images. And finally, what happened today in history, the deadliest plane crash in the world of aviation. The year was 1977. Two Boeing 747 aircraft collided on a foggy runway. This happened in Spain. The collision led to a massive fire. 500 people died. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
Ils m'ont vu passer.